I have a couple of Termagants, the big mama bug that spews Termagants on the battlefield, reinforcing the swarm even as it advances in the ravenous hunger for biomass. One is glued together with magnetized weapons, and another I managed to figure out a way to actually magnetize it fully, so it could be deployed as a Tervagon or as a Tyranofex, depending on what I fancy bringing to the fray. The trick was using green stuff to create tabs for the magnets so the spawning belly could just clap to the ribcage. So I'm gonna need a swarm to accompany them. Anywho, I picked up a few brood boxes on Amazon. I figured if I'm gonna do this, might as well do it Griswold style.
Gonna do it right and big. You want something you can be proud of, don't you?
You get 13 Termagants, and why are these the only ones who aren't Gaunts? Hormagaunts? Barbgaunts? Neuragaunts? Nope, these are Gants. GW decided to go with the spelling for a quarrelsome woman, which seems a bit weird.
Whatever.
Assembly. After getting all the bits off the sprues, a touch of the X-Acto knife to get rid of some very minor mould lines. The legs glue directly to the main torso, but they don't fit that great. Maybe the new edition fits a bit better. Maybe I'll grab a box and see. I am after those special weapons. But this is resolved very easily with a little bit of Vista dissolved putty. An old brush paints the white goo into the joint and fills it in nicely. So along the queue we go, painting it into every joint of every bug. Okay, it is immediately apparent that they're going to be just too fiddly to magnetize, so I reckon I'll do half with flesh borers and half with devourers, because when I got these, spine fists were a joke and weren't even worth considering. Grabbing each, the two shoulders slot in easily and a dab of glue locks them into place. Add a touch in the socket, insert the ball, adjust to preferred pose. Right, getting them onto the bases. Using the back of a brush, slot it between the rear legs and the mid pair of arms and push them into the hole. It's a real tight fit, which is why the brush handle is needed, and this also negates the need to apply glue. With the whole brood on their bases, grabbing the heads, a dab of Citadel glue and drop every head into place. Everything is pretty monopose, but I'd say that's a good thing. It feels appropriate. The sheer uniformity of the swarm, all identical, all expendable, all charging forward as one with bioweapon at the ready. On to priming. I stretched a strip of sellotape over a metal ruler and created a conga line of Gants, so I could place it across a box and blast them all easily with Chaos Black Primer. Afterwards, some of them need to be picked up and given a little squirt from below to get a solid comprehensive layer. Okay, here we go. Actually, this wasn't as monotonous as I feared. It was actually kind of meditative, just getting into it, tuning out, and away we go. A nice layer of MacLeod blue all over the areas of skin, applied with a larger brush just to speed the process up a little because there's a lot to get through. And then the Zarus purple applied to the hooves, the layers of overlapping chitin, armour on the torsos, and on the bioweapons and the carapaces on the heads. Some white scar painted delicately into the vents and gill things, creating the nice pale base so that it can help accent the next colour. The white scar also goes into those Termagants with the open mouths, or the extended wiggling tongues that Tyranids so love to show off, and onto the glowing sections of the flesh borers and devourers. Once this was dry, grabbing the nihilic oxide and a simple wash over all the white scar so that it settles into the troughs and grooves, providing a darker hue that lightens up towards the tops of the features, getting my nice bioluminescent glow effect. Dry brushing. Imric Blue Dry. Dab the brush into the pots and then rather than wipe it away because I'm a cheapskate, I paint the tail tips, getting a nice solid hue, and then there is just enough left behind so that the sweeps across the rest of the beastie leaves a nice accent, bringing out the raised areas, the ribs, the corners, the texture of the limbs and the cheeks and teeth on the heads and the claws. Anywho, onto the Ethereum Blue Dry, and the same tactic. Dip in the pot, paint onto the Imric, and then apply a more frugal dry brush over all the areas that got the Imric, accenting the blue, catching the edges, and making the muzzles really glow. This is where not gluing the Termagants to their bases proved a wise move, because there were some areas I simply couldn't get to, and by popping them free, I could get underneath and dry brush the ribs and other hard to reach areas. And then on to the Nuln oil, applied all over the main model, the heads and the various limbs, work it into the vents and the textures, the joints and holes, and then leave it to dry on its head so it pools up in the shadows of the overlaps. Genestealer purple on the chitin. Because it's a normal layer paint and there's no solid areas of this colour, I wiped away on my hand, the cutting board, a paper towel, whatever was around at the time, and then applied a dry brush to all the areas of the Xeros. Finally, mood green, a single touch to the eyes. For those that I botched, a second dab of Nuln oil once it was dry. This settles around the eye socket, hides the straight paint, and really brings out the green glowing eye. Actually, you know what? That looks so good, I did it to all the eyes, darkening the area of the socket and making the mood green really pop. Back onto their bases they go, and then Elmer's glue squirted on and spread around, so I can sprinkle on the 1/8 inch small weld slate and stone to coat the rest of the base and lock the Tyranids into place as they gallop across a rocky terrain. And back to the box for a blast of varnish to lock in the gravel and protect the paint job. Once dry, grabbing them by the tail, this allows me to turn them over and get a second squirt onto the underside, and then repeat the whole process a few more times. So here we have a horde of Termagants, Guntai Virago. This quadruped is grown for speed, agility, and a vicious, unsatiable hunger. Small of form, it forms the primary infantry unit of the swarm, along with the Hormigaunt. But unlike that breed, the Termagant is developed with a ranged biomorph weapon to supplement its claws and teeth. Termagants may seem feeble compared to almost any other Tyranid creature, but like the Ripper, it is weight of numbers that makes them a force to fear. The seething masses pouring forward without relent or care for their own survival, to then crash into the foe or unleash relentless barrages of living, voracious ammunition. When a Tervagon is present, the vile monster steadily gestates and disgorges Termagants, replenishing their numbers even as they advance across the battlefield, the carpet of living creatures forming a wall around the great beast. Termagants are generally crafted with a flesh borer, a grotesque rifle-like bioweapon that spits a borer beetle from a compact brood nest. If the tick strikes a target, it immediately goes into a frenzy of consumption, drilling into armor and then chewing into flesh. They can also be developed with the more potent Devourer bioweapon, a clump of rotting meat filled with worm-like parasites. The Termagant sends a bioelectric charge down its limbs and into the nest, the sudden contractions hurling showers of the grubs through the air and at the enemy. Where they land, they rapidly bore into flesh, targeting the nervous system as they riddle the body and offer an excruciating death. They can also be grown with spine fists, which are a pair of symbiotic living pistols that are fed by a pneumatic tube that bladders in the Termagant's body blast air into, to then hurl vicious spines that are each coated with a potent neurotoxin. The tiny spikes are limited to a short range, but even the most trivial scratch can ensure a nightmarishly painful death. Units of Termagants often have a singular bioform amongst them, armed with a heavier and more effective weapon. The rest of the force defend in this creature. The Shard Launcher is a weighty weapon grown on the Termagant's shoulder. The hefty bioweapon spits heavy javelins of chitin that erupt on impact, pelting targets with waves of razor-edged shards. The Spike Rifle is a heavy weapon formed around a bone barrel that fires viciously sharp harpoons that can cover considerable distance. The hardened crystalline tip helps the projectile penetrate armor, allowing it to gouge into flesh. The Strangleweb is formed by a symbiotic creature that is grafted to the Termagant, and when activated it spews a mass of sticky webbing. The glue causes it to stick to targets, whereupon it tightens, constricting to cut into flesh and prevent them drawing breath. The mixture of a crushing fist of strands and suffocation ensures a miserable end, but those unfortunate enough to have the strength to resist find themselves immobile and now helpless to a slow and agonizing death as they are consumed by the lesser life forms of the swarm.